are back with the What It Takes Radio Company, helping connect you with your audience. And we have a program today from What If Everything You Thought You Knew Was Wrong? That's part of our inconvenient ideas, and we try to do that from time to time. Well, perhaps today is a little different because today is September 11th, and September 11th was a terrible day for everybody. And for me, it was even a very frightening day. So can I take time on the program to tell you a little bit about that today? Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, friends, and even maybe a few foes. This is hopefully something there is inconvenient, but hopefully useful and helpful. So here we go. Obviously, this is a day that is crammed full of stuff. The assassination of the young activist performer, celebrated Charlie Kirk, and I'm not even sure I like the word activist, because oftentimes that has a sense that it is something wrong. And that's kind of what the New York Times was implying when they called him not just an activist, but a right-wing activist. Well, bunch of junk on top of them. That's a lie. He was an activist for free speech and the American tradition. And he was brutally murdered. He was brutally murdered. That's what happened. And that was yesterday, September 10th. And of course, as that was happening, and we were going through that, no matter what your persuasion or your possibility or your antipathy, we also, as I remembered, oh my goodness, tomorrow's September 11th. Well, of course, indeed, this is 9/11. And of course, there are a variety of people making comments about that and making stories about that and telling stories about that. And I would like in some way to do a little bit of that. I'm not going to talk about the Charlie Kirk thing because you know that I have a 72-hour rule. I made a comment. I think it's a deep and almost despicable tragedy. But right now, everybody's talking. Let it sit, let it be. We'll find out more. And then maybe we can talk and say something that is worth saying rather than, as most people are doing right now, just filling up the airwaves with things that others are saying and things they may not know or any thoughtfulness they may have. So that's for another day. But 9/11 is important, as many people have pointed out. And I was aware of this kind of because I do really try and support Tunnels to Towers, which of course goes back to the 9/11 day. The way of supporting those firefighters and those policemen who died and perished on that day. And then, of course, our ongoing contributions. And to me, paying my 9/11 $11 a month is just as important as paying for my health insurance and my mortgage. I do that because it helps support veterans and families and first responder families that have been injured or died or severely injured. And that is a good thing. And I do support them. So, in effect, there is their story that I saw it. People in 9/11, 24 years ago, are still dying. They are still sick and dying as a result of what happened 24 years ago. And of course, some of our support goes to them and to their families, even though it's a long time ago. However, it reminds me of my 9/11 story, which I have repeated before, but I think it's always worth remembering. Part of the problem is that we are so full of information, sometimes we are overwhelmed by it so that we forget to remember the stories that are important. I remember the day, just like anybody else who was alive and conscious that day. Um, I had been out, I think, for an early morning walk. I'd done my work in the morning, then took a little bit of a breakfast break and a little bit of exercise, came back in and turned the television on just to catch a little bit of the news, and the news was already happening. And at that time, there was still speculation that it might have been an accident, or rather freak accident. They weren't even sure of how big the airplane was, but it certainly was an airplane that had crashed into 9/11. And of course, that was the news. That happened. Bad thing to happen, but that's what it was. It was only later that they began to see that it wasn't obviously just a small airplane that had crashed. It was a clear blue sky. So that shouldn't have happened. And all of a sudden, how did this happen? And then I was actually watching when the second plane hit. Boom. And then, of course, everybody knew. This is really bad. This is an attack. And some of that is being replayed today. And then all of a sudden, the discovery that something had happened at the Pentagon and they couldn't keep track of another airplane. Then all of a sudden, the plane goes down in Pennsylvania. And many of you who were conscious at that time, alive and awake, remember that day profoundly. Now, the issue, as someone has pointed out, is that there are millions of young people, young men and women, most of them are adults now, who were children at that time, and they really have no memory of what that day was like. And so it behooves us to remember, and to tell the stories. There was an incredible amount of terrible tragedy. When I think of people jumping, knowing that 90 stories below they're going to die a terrible death. And yet, any of you who've ever been near a hot fire flame know that sometimes you would have to make that decision. Do you perish in the flames or do you perish in a suicide jump? Can you imagine the horror and the terror of that times? Just thinking about it. And then, of course, the many stories of people who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and all of the coincidences that went into who died and who did not, and where it went. Now, my own personal story is strong in the sense that at that particular time, our youngest daughter, Megan, who, after she graduated from the University of Minnesota and decided that she wanted to be in publishing, had said after her graduation, "Dad, I'm going to New York City. I found an apartment in Brooklyn, and if I can make $9 an hour at the Barnes and Noble in Union Square, I can afford it with my friend. So we're going to New York City because if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere." And she made it. And she was working for a major publishing company. And she tells us, she said, all of a sudden, I was up in upper Manhattan. And so we didn't immediately know, and everything went blank. The phone, we couldn't make any phone calls because the phone lines were jammed. And we saw all this thing going on, and we weren't sure at all what was happening. We tried to get some news, and that began to happen. Finally, she was able to get through to Karen, my wife, her mother, and she was in more than a panic. And she said, oh my goodness. And he said, well, what's wrong? She said, Tom. Now, Tom was the current beau of the time. She was an attractive young woman. She still is quite attractive. And so she had a number of New York City friends. And this was the man of the moment. Good man. She said, Tom had an 8 o'clock appointment at the World Trade Center for breakfast this morning. You see, now he worked in the financial services arena. He was one of those hotshots, that was there in insurance and investing and all the things that made that a lot of the financial center. And of course, she couldn't reach him. She couldn't reach him. The phones weren't working there. She was lucky she could even get through to talk to my wife. So there we were, wondering, well, what had happened to Tom? And our thoughts and prayers, you can imagine what we went through that day. Nothing we could do but wait and hope and, as we say, pray. Thoughts and prayers. Toward the end of the afternoon, we got the word. Tom was okay. Here was the deal. For some reason, this very punctual, on-time guy had gotten delayed. So he missed or was going to be late for his breakfast appointment at the top of the towers. If he had been on time, he would have been sitting at the top of the towers. But he was not there. He was down below, still a few blocks away when it all happened. And now we know that he's safe and sound. That was our day, and I can still remember it well. Later on, there was obviously all kinds of things that went on. Supposedly, I think it's probably just a pure legend, but supposedly it was said that the actual passport of the guy who was driving the plane, the Muhammad Atta, who was the killer who has hijacked the plane and was piloting in to the World Trade Center, that supposedly his passport was found on the roof of her little apartment house on the east side of Manhattan. I don't know if that's true, but it was kind of the story of the time. We went to New York 2 weeks later. It was real easy to get a cheap flight to New York. Nobody wanted to go. Everybody was afraid. But we did go. And I still remember as we came up, the plane all of a sudden, as some of you know, in New York, okay, he's coming in, and now he's circling up, the river, the Hudson River, to, in effect, land at LaGuardia Airport. And we looked out. We saw the steaming and all of the wreckage there. And it was just terrible. This one lady just started crying her heart out. She said, "Oh my God." We were there. We were safe. We got, went out, and you could get closer to the damage. This was 2 weeks later. But the thing that got us was the amount of posters that were still up. And you may have remembered that is people put posters all over New York City. Has anyone seen so-and-so? We don't know. Where are they? They're probably dead, but we don't know. No body has been found. What happened to them? Has anyone seen? Does anyone know? Those posters were all over New York City, and I can still remember this small Asian woman just crying her heart out, saying, "Has anyone seen my daughter? Has anyone seen my daughter? Please, please help me find my daughter." Now, of course, these were lives that were not necessarily wrecked. Many of them were certainly hurt badly. Some of them were ruined later on. But that was the story of 24 years ago. And of course, the story goes on. and the wars that all of that did and came to continued on, and in many ways, perhaps they're still going on as the battle between the Islamic terrorists and those who hate the state of Israel and want something done about that. That struggle goes on to this very day. I just tell you that story because you need to have your own remembrance of that. And someday, we'll take time to tell our little grandson Arlo about what his mother went through that day as he learns more about it, and then our own thoughts, and hopefully a way that we can share reflections about, tragedy, grace, mercy, God, goodness, and hopefully inspire them to make it a better world. That's basically what Charlie Kirk was all about, you know, at that time. He was only obviously, I think, 6 or 7 years old when 9/11 happened. He says it was one of the motivating things of his life, even though he barely remembered it. He said he loved America, and I think he did. I know he did, very much so. So there we go. I would encourage you now to, we are coming forward on the 23rd to the new year, the Rosh Hashanah. That's when I celebrate the new year. It is the traditional Jewish New Year. I am not of the Jewish tradition, but I am grateful that one time a good friend said that, Stan, sometimes I think you're better at being a Jew than I am, or certainly some of my friends, because of my religious faith. And he said, I want to make you an honorary member. And so I covet with that, and I celebrate that. But so you see, the days of awe are the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day. And during that time, you're supposed to, not like our traditional New Year's where we eat too much food, watch too much football, uh, have fireworks go off and scare the animals and scare the dogs, and probably, doing the things we do. That this time is supposed to be a time of reconciliation, forgiveness, certainly reflection. How am I doing? I just simply had a phone call, and I was talking to someone who knows a friend of mine, but I've been trying to reach him, and he hasn't responded. And so I said to her, do you know Bob? And I used his last name. She said, oh, of course I know him. He's a good friend of mine. I said, well, he's a good friend of mine. And she said, well, if you want to reach him, I said, I've tried to reach him through phone call or email, and he hasn't responded. But you know what? If there's something I've done that he doesn't like, or something that I should have done that I didn't, I want to make it right. It's part of as I often say, because he is a cowboy, it's part of the cowboy tradition. You don't fight or shoot, only if you have to protect yourself. You make it right, keep your word. And so that's part of what the days of awe are all about. And so I encourage you, in the midst of all this chaos and trouble and time, to say, okay, there's so much I have no control over. And that's profoundly true. But what are some of the things about my own attitude, my own behavior, my own lethargy, about my life and business, that I would like to sense some new boldness, bravery, courage, and power? Boldness, bravery, courage, and power. What are they? Where are they? Well, as you hear, my phone is ringing, so somebody wants to talk to me, and I better find out what they're all about. But I hope this has been helpful to you, and I wish you all the best. And please give this some thought and consideration, and reach out to me at stan@witradio.net, stan@witradio.net. All the best and blessings, and may something awesome happen to you today. Bye for now.